Good morning, everyone. My name is Colin Pope. I'm the editor of the Austin Business Journal. Pleased to be moderating today's panel. And I believe you all have a lunch right after this. I want to make sure that you all get on time. So I think we're going to start the program now. And just so you know, I think we'll spend some time, maybe 30 or 45 minutes up here having a conversation, talking a lot of economics, talking a lot about prices. What's that, the effect that that's having on us, on manufacturers, and so we'll probably speak for about 30, 45 minutes and then give you all the opportunity to interact with us and join the conversation, if you will. Let me first introduce our esteemed panelists that we have today. Pretty excited about this. Directly to my left here, we've got Jose Bravo. Until 3 weeks ago, he was the chief scientist of Shell International Exploration and Production. He is now retired. Please give him a round of applause. Congratulations on that.
I hope I succeed.
I think you will. Good luck with it. Minay Kuban, she is Yucel. She is the chief economist over energy at the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. Minay, welcome. We've got Bill Strauss. He's the chief economist over manufacturing at the Federal Reserve Bank up in Chicago. And then also from Chicago, we've got Dr. Aaron Grossi, chief economist from Underwriters Laboratory. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you. And, I thought that at first it might be good. We're going to do, I'm really excited about talking about the future, what we can expect, and we're going to get into that, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't first talk about a little bit about the economics behind how we got to where we are at now, which is quite a fascinating time in energy. I don't think I need to tell anybody here that. And Minay, I did want to start with you, if you don't mind, because you've got a handout that I think most people here have on some chairs, and
yeah, it looks awful though. I have to say, it looks nothing.
Sorry for the printouts. We were hoping we would have some video here, but we didn't have the big screen to be able to play with.
But I'll just walk you through it. I have to admit, you'll have to use the imagination on this. It looks really bad. So I'll just briefly go over what I was going to say. So we are in a very low oil price environment. We've been here before. And it's good for oil producing, oil importing countries like the US, but it's really hurts countries that are producing in Texas, producing states. So I'm going to talk about how the US is affected and how the states are affected and so on, and what we expect going forward. So unfortunately, this first chart that you can't see, it's supposed to be oil and gas prices. Well, you can see it a little, but anyway. So just sort of imagine, oil prices were about 100 for 3 years, and then they collapsed in June of 2014 from $100 to about 45. And then this year, they've come down to even like 26. We saw a 26 in the daily prices.
What are we,
now,
$38 today, something like that? $38
right.
today.
So the weekly is about 38, and yesterday it was 38. So why that happened? It was really weak demand and ample supply, and the U.S. has been a major factor in this supply glut. Gas, you see the gas there. Gas is actually really low as well. Nobody talks about gas, but gas was last week $1.77. Yesterday it was $1.98. I'm talking about natural gas prices, not gasoline. And that's a very, very low price too. So we're getting a double whammy there in terms of production. All right, so if you go to the next slide, let me see what that has on it. Well, it was supposed to go back all the way to the 1920s and show US oil production. And our record high was in 1970, and since then it's been falling. But starting in 2008 with the shale revolution, as you know, we've really come back up. And we've added about 4.4 million barrels per day. And that is higher than the production of any country in the world, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, and maybe Iraq. They're coming up to that 4.4. So the addition in those 6 years or 8 years is more than the many producers out there. So in 2015, the average was about $9.43 million barrels per day. This is a annual average. We do have numbers for December. That was down to, it was lower than that, 9.2 something, and then we have weekly estimates, and the weekly estimates are even lower. So we're about 9.03. So production has started coming down. So if you want to look at that, it's hard to see, but the next slide, I don't know what happened there. You see the rig count plunge. That's the line that's solid there. It's plunged about 75%. And the other one, which was supposed to be a line, is in these little spikes, and that's the output, U.S. output. And you can see that it started coming down in like March of last year. So the question is, why did not output come back down as fast as the rig count? The rig count plunged, but output did not. And it is productivity increases in the oil sector. You've heard this. It's technology. So we've had incredible productivity increases in drilling and in wells. And part of it is, as the rig count came down and activity came down, prices came down, costs came down. So costs are now about 40% lower than they were when prices were 100. So that has sort of helped producers produce as well. But we're seeing now, of course, a lot of companies in trouble. And if you, let me see if that next slide shows that. Okay, forget that next slide. It sort of is talking about investment. What happened now, as the rig count came down, investment in oil and gas drilling has really come down. So looking at 2014 fourth quarter to 2015 fourth quarter, 51% decline in fixed investment in mining and exploration. And so that's been a huge hit. And if you look at the companies, you have a lot of companies, of course, who are bleeding cash. Last year we had about 69 bankruptcies in the US, and this year we're probably going to see more bankruptcies in the oil and gas sector. The S&P has downgraded almost every oil company's credit, and some companies, and like Hunt Oil and Southwestern, which are actually quite large companies, they have been downgraded to not investment grade. So the oil industry is hurting.
Monet, can I ask a quick
Yeah,
question
sure.
about all of that?
Sure.
So, because over at the Austin Business Journal, I mean, we're writing a lot about these bankruptcies
Yep.
and things. On the flip side, when me and my employees drive into work and have to fill up with gas, we're jumping up and down, for joy. There is certainly good and bad. And do you have a sense, and maybe any of you, do you all have a sense of overall lower prices like this? Is it good for the U.S.?
My next slide.
Is that a very good, my segue.
That slide actually has come out, no color there, but that shows you that actually final demand has actually been higher after the price crash than before. So if you look at that chart that sort of looks like this, and it says households benefits, what you're seeing is the first bar is 6 quarters before the crash. The second bar is 6 quarters after the crash. So you can see, for example, that final demand is higher after the crash than before. But where is it coming from? It's coming from the consumer. So that personal consumption number that you see, 1.6 versus 2.1. So the consumer is spending more after. And they're also spending not just on, also on residential investment. So they're also spending on housing. And that's that small bar, 0.1 to 0.2. I swear I did put all those digits on there. It used to be like 0.1 to 0.3. So we're not that, anyway, I won't go there. So the consumer is spending. Who's hurting? It's the manufacturers who are manufacturing machinery and so on for the oil industry. So you can see that in fixed business investment. And we talked about, I showed you, well, you didn't see the chart, but I talked about how investment had fallen. So there is a decline in business fixed investment after the crash, if you look at those numbers. One other thing to point out here, though, it's not just oil prices. The dollar is very strong. So the strong dollar also makes things cheaper for the consumer, so we can buy, the imported goods are much cheaper, but it also makes things harder for manufacturers because they have competition and they can't sell their goods because it's more expensive now.
Right.
So that's the answer to that question, Drew.
Very good.
So I'll just finish up, just show you the states. It's, again, hard to see, but I had done some work, and so the states are affected depending on their share of energy production, and that map that you see, unfortunately, the colors aren't there, but any state with a number on it would be red, and they are the states that are hurt by the oil price decline. And it's Wyoming, West Virginia, everybody that you would expect, Louisiana, Alaska, Oklahoma, Texas. And the other states with no numbers on them would have been green. And those are the states that are helped. So when you look at this, you can see that most of that map is actually in the green category, if you could see it. So most of the US is helped by a decline in oil prices. And this is, the numbers are a 50% decline. And how does that affect employment? Now, if you looked at 2015 and growth in the states, these states that were in red or have the numbers on them were all in recession with the exception of Texas and New Mexico. So we sort of skirted it, but. So I will show one more chart and I'll stop there.
Sure.
How's that? So low oil prices are hurting our producers, but we do have one offset from low natural gas prices, and that is our petrochemical industry. The petrochemical industry benefits with low natural gas prices, and especially benefits when that differential between oil and gas is really high. Because our petrochemical guys use natural gas as an input, the rest of the world uses oil as an input. So if natural gas prices are low and oil is high, then we have a huge advantage and we're very competitive in that market. Now, though, with oil prices down to 30, that differential has narrowed, and that's what you see in this chart. So the gas feedstock and the oil feedstock, oil-derived feedstock, so the oil is on the bottom, the gas on top, and you can see that differential between them has narrowed because oil prices have declined. So overall, I suppose I can say overall, low oil prices are good for the US economy, bad for the states, the producing states, and for exporting countries. What do we expect going forward? There was another chart about price expectations, but it's totally messed up. So all I can tell you is that if you look at the futures market, it's sort of flat, actually, $45 going out to like 2017.
Yeah. The
problem is the confidence bands around those prices are like this. So the 95% confidence band, which means that the prices in those bands with 95% probability goes from $20 to $80. So it's really, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. So it's really not telling you anything. So I'll just leave it at that.
Very
and say,
good.
There's a lot of uncertainty. One more thing. Sorry. One more thing. What are the risks on the downside in terms of prices? China's growth, is slowing, and everybody claims that China's growth is actually slower than what they say. There's a lot of oil in the market still. Inventories are high. Iran is back in the market, so those are all downward. Upward risk is because the prices are low, there's not much investment going on now, so going forward, you're going to see less output coming in, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah,
so there are some risks.
You touched on it just for a minute, but I wouldn't mind, maybe Bill can expand on this just a little bit, specifically manufacturing and what these low prices have done for manufacturers. What are you seeing, Bill?
Well, if I could just take a little riff off of
Sure.
what Minay was saying, as way I think about the U.S. economy. Lower energy prices is by far a positive for the U.S. We still import 30% or so of our oil needs, and that's where we get that real benefit. We're sending less money outside to foreign producers of energy. That being said, one thing we have seen is the fact that while we get this positive stimulus coming off of every $10 reduction in oil prices, that stimulus, that stimulative effect on our economy has been going down over time. And this is due to several factors, one of which is the fact that over time we are needing less energy to drive the business of our economy. When you look at the number of BTUs that we need to produce $1 worth of GDP, it's been cut by more than a half over the last 50 years. So therefore, that bang for the buck that you get from a lower energy effect has less of a dramatic impact on our economy. Manufacturing has played a role in that. It's a cost of doing business, and as we know, businesses are continuing trying to innovate and to do things in a more effective, efficient way, one of which is using less and less energy over time. In addition, the manufacturing sector, while we're about to produce at a record level of output, as a share of our economy, is representing a smaller piece of our economy, largely because of how strong productivity has been in manufacturing. It has kept prices in that sector relatively low compared to prices of economists and service sector workers in general, doctors and so forth, rising. So it is about half of what it was, say, after World War II as a share of our economy. Again, that reflects the fact that it has less of that energy sector has less of a stimulant effect because the service sector requires so much less energy to do their business. In our region, the Chicago district, we've got steel manufacturers, and you think about how much energy does it take to produce a ton of steel, which transacts right now in the marketplace at, let's call it $400-500 a ton. Compare that to the amount of energy needed to be producing $400-500 worth of economist input and output. I have a small office at the bank, and if you added up the amount of hours it takes me to earn that income, you're talking about energy needs that are probably just a couple of bucks all told. So it's just a significantly different effect as we move to this more of a universally service-based economy as compared to a manufacturing-based driven economy.
Hey, well, while we're with you, Bill, let's. I'd like to hone in on vehicles and cars. Green cars are, I would say, not as popular as maybe we want them to be. And this doesn't sound like good news for the Prius dealerships and those selling Chevy Volts and even Teslas, maybe.
No, thank God for regulation. We do have, it's going to be very interesting because we've got market forces that are going completely opposite versus regulatory type forces. We've got these CAFE requirements, corporate average fuel economy requirements that are going to require us to have vehicles in 10 years, actually now less than 10 years, that will meet a 54.5 mile per gallon standard. It will almost certainly put a significant push towards using alternative type of vehicle technology, electric vehicles, hybrids, and so forth. But the market right now is speaking very strongly. And as much, how many people in here, by the way, drive an pure electric vehicle? So you've got a Tesla or a Leaf? He's got a Leaf. All right, so pure electric. So one out of our room. How many drive a hybrid? A couple of more. All right. You're basically reflecting the market. The peak of the alternative vehicles, non-gasoline, non-diesel, internal combustion engine, was reached a couple of years ago, just over 4%. It has since then plunged down to 2.5% of the market at this point. It was hard to justify that purchase even at $4 or $5 a gallon for fuel. The payback was many, many years. At the price of $2, that vehicle will probably disintegrate before you actually reach a payback relative to an internal combustion engine. It's nothing to laugh about because the other thing is, it would be one thing if we can just have these technologies as a costless technology. They're very expensive, and it's expected to add a neighborhood of $3,000 to $5,000 to the price tag of a vehicle. And while most of you in the room can probably say, fine, I'll pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 more, do well for the environment. For the average purchaser who's buying a $20,000, $25,000 vehicle, this is going to be a big cost for them to incur. So.
Another interesting trend that I've kind of observed when it comes to vehicles, I don't know if you've noticed, but I definitely see more, let's say, Dodge Chargers on the road than I do, Prius or any of the others. And Dodge Chargers, the new Trans Am's coming out pretty soon. I was just watching the videos, and I would be very surprised if that gets more than 16 miles a gallon. Is this,
Well,
have you noticed this?
No, absolutely. I mean, more and more particularly, you're picking on passenger cars. I think the market was very reflective. Last year, we set a record level for vehicle sales, and up by about just shy of 6% gain off of 2014. So the consumer is doing well, and Renee's shared with you how consumer spending continues to do well. They're willing to spend it on vehicles, but passenger cars actually went down last year by about 3%. Light trucks went up by nearly 13%. And of course, those are your pickup trucks and the crossover vehicles and sport utility vehicles. So that's where the action is. Bigger products which are less fuel efficient. They're better fuel efficiency than they have been over time, but still relative to a passenger car or some of these smaller type of products, it's far less efficient.
Very good.
By the way, I took a tour of the Austin Energy yesterday morning, and they took us to show their electric row over there where they've got the second generation high-speed charging stations, and I didn't see any vehicles parked there charging, so I thought that was interesting. I would have thought they would have at least brought a couple of vehicles into the setup.
For show.
As an economist, I look at things like that.
Yes, Jose?
Yeah, I want to comment on that because from the point of view of the oil companies, it's what do we see as risks? You mentioned risks, huh? And in terms of risks that need to be mitigated, the number one risk is sustainability of the company as a whole, right? And that centers around the typical things of water and land use and so on. But the CO2 issue is seen as a big threat in years to come. It's very much talked about, and it just appears that because there's no real agreement as to how to regulate it or price it more than anything, you don't get a lot of pressure. So if that thing were to break one way or the other, that issue of pricing CO2 to really value CO2 and avoidance value or whatever kind of value you want to put on it, if that breaks one way, I think you'll see a very rapid resuscitation of these things. If it doesn't break, or if it breaks the other way, you'll see. There's a saying in the oil industry that the Stone Age didn't end because of lack of stones, and the same thing goes with oil and gas, right? The fossil fuel era is not going to end up with because of no fossil fuels available. It's going to end up. It's going to finish when alternatives become affordable and sustainable. And as long as that doesn't happen, the drivers are there. One of the things you mentioned that is really important is the fact that countries like Saudi Arabia can produce oil at significantly lower cost than the selling price even now. Okay. With existing assets. What the impact of the low oil prices, which you will see probably 10, 15 years from now, is the fact that everybody cut their investment budgets. So right now, the proven reserves are going down because nobody's making commitments to develop certain reserves. But the amount of oil and gas that is available just physically is way, way high. So the strategies of all the oil companies, and my former company included, even though I cannot speak on their behalf, but I know a little bit of what they're thinking is it's going to take diversity because these swings are unpredictable. We were notoriously idiotic about predicting the oil shale boom. Okay, it just happened, and nobody this hockey stick you showed, nobody would have said that.
Right.
Okay, we're also not very illuminated. Maybe you economists were, but as us engineers, the crash we could have seen coming 5 years ago when the whole thing was going up, and you know what happens when you exceed supply to demand, right? I mean that's so. The way the primary energy supplier, and that's something I want to emphasize because the conference here seems to me to be very much directed towards the electricity and the grid and so on, other sessions, okay? But the real turning points happen at the very beginning of the value chain, you know, at the supply point of the value chain. And that's the mining part, the extraction part, or the conversion part of solar energy or wind energy, whatever. That is what happens there. So to mitigate risk, the way the oil companies are looking at it is diversifying, okay? So you will see continued efforts pursuing wind and pursuing solar photovoltaic and pursuing solar heat and pursuing even artificial photosynthesis type things in the long range, because that's what mitigates these horrible swings. You know?
Of all those baskets, which ones right now would you say are getting the most eggs put into them? And where do we have the most hope?
It's funny. There's just a certain number of eggs, and that's something my boss always told me. We only have so many eggs, right? You cannot. I mean, no matter where you put them, you only have so many eggs.
Right.
You see a variation. I mean, some let's say 3-4 years ago, maybe more, maybe 6 years ago, biofuel was a big thing.
Sure.
Now people have cooled off on it. There's been a realization that there's such a big sustainability challenge with them that it's cooled off. So then wind became a big thing. Shell actually invested at the time in wind, and it's funny because wind contracting, getting wind farms on landowners' lands is exactly the same process as getting oil wells. So believe it or not, we were perfectly positioned in Shell to do that. Except instead of digging an oil well, you just plant a wind turbine. But now, I don't know if you've been to West Texas, but it's really visible. Indeed. And it's really noisy, and it's really worried about creating microclimates in things. So that kind of hit a low. Now, right now, photovoltaic is growing by leaps and bounds. The costs are coming down significantly.
Amazing innovations in that area I've seen.
Right. I mean, it is. If they can solve the problem of night, then it would be a very. So right now, that's the darling. Okay,
right.
The photovoltaic. But it's going to take all of them. Okay, it's going to take all of them. There have always been things like, and then you know what? People forget about nuclear. We have such a mental barrier about it, but on the sustainability side, nuclear has tremendous advantages, okay? And it's more of a psycho-economic issue with nuclear, but that's the thing. And then there's in hydrocarbons, there's a whole new world in what's called methane hydrates in the bottom of the ocean. I mean, there's more methane in the bottom of the ocean and methane hydrates than all the methane we have already taken out and burned, right?
Wow.
So availability of the resource is not the problem. The problem is how do you make it sustainable, and regulation needs to get on top of that. I mean, that's something that the free market needs help with, in terms of at least give it a value, make it valuable, make sustainability something that can make or break business, all right? And that's not happened yet.
And Aaron, I want to go to you. I know you had some slides. You wanted to talk about some of the current trends that you see. Not just here, but on a global level. Some good, some bad. I would assume. What do you have? And then also, I do want you to talk about a little bit. You mentioned that investments are waning a little bit in some of these future technologies, and why would we invest right now when what we've got going is working for us?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's actually a good, rotation here. We have two economists mostly talking about what's happening here in oil in the United States and the impacts, which are, certainly important to how our whole energy system is evolving. But it's not the only trend, obviously, that impacts what the future energy system looks like. In our company, or my company, Yucel, mostly looks at this in terms of the broader trends because we're trying to track, which technology will actually, see a pathway to market, which will actually, create new industries, because we're trying to figure out where to invest our time and energy and engineering competence in order to serve these industries. So for me, I'm looking at it and saying, we're trying to figure out, will these new technologies for, with PV, wind, battery storage, et cetera, will these actually, take off and, end up, today obviously they're only maybe 13% of generating capacity here in the United States, so such a tiny amount, especially with regard to transportation. Transportation is about 90% oil today. So we're not living in that kind of a world, but, what could be the factors that drive an electrical grid in a new direction? And certainly, to Jose's point, CO2 is one of the biggest factors. I mean, we're looking at China and India in particular. Their needs, their industrial needs for development would put us at basically increasing carbon by 50% in the next 25 years. We all know we already have, sort of a concerning carbon situation, enough so that our global leaders have met at the Paris conference recently, and actually are starting to make commitments again against keeping carbon at a sustainable level. So, that I think is a huge factor. I did talk a little bit about, I'm sorry you didn't get my slides, but it is true. A lot of the conversation around whether PV will win out and wind will win out is around grid parity, which is such a misleading conversation, at the end of the day. I mean, it just doesn't account for things like what is the value of carbon, or what could it be? And it also doesn't account for battery storage, frankly. I mean, when you add PV plus battery storage, especially as the commercialization of batteries is already taking off, and we would expect it to track similarly to panels themselves, which were, 5 years more or less became, absolutely affordable, and within striking distance of quote unquote parity. When you add those two together, it's really a knockout, in terms of grid parity. I also talked a little bit about just the demands for reliability. I mean, weather events, we know, like Sandy, weather events, Sandy, are things that make people start to, sit up and think maybe there's a different way to configure our energy system so that it's more reliable. And if we're expected to have more weather events, in part because of our climate situation, it definitely causes different industries, especially healthcare industry, to want to look at how can they construct, a more distributed system, and have more control over the energy system. I speak a lot I've become close with the operations folks at Lurie Children's Hospital, for instance, in Chicago, and they're working on a project right now with their neighbors, Prentice Hospital and Northwestern, to try to figure out how they can take the hospital's distributed and then to turn to their utility ComEd and basically say, we can do this without you, we can make this investment without you. Or you can make this investment with us. And we expect, we're seeing that type of situation take off much more, in the tech environment. You hear about that from the Googles, the Salesforce.coms, the Facebooks, et cetera, who are having that same inclination of, perhaps it is a bit more expensive than, mainstream companies or small and medium-sized enterprises can handle, but those types of companies can make that investment early. And start this way of taking money off the table for utilities. I also go into, again, battery storage is huge. I mean, Tesla's obviously out in front as sort of the circus leader, if you will, but they're really saying the commercialization of batteries starts now, and we know from the submissions that we're seeing that it certainly is happening. We're seeing a lot of different new configurations of batteries, different types, different manufacturers entering. It's certainly a hotspot for entrepreneurship, which I'm sure Jeremy Edelman of Energy Foundry could tell you as well. And the U.S. is heavily invested in battery storage as well, and actually very well positioned to do well commercially in that market. I think that's one of the other trends that I was mentioning is just the digital disruption in the space as an opportunity for the U.S. marketplace. So the fact that I took a trip to Germany last year, studied their energy system for about a year, just trying to figure out how are they making it work from a technology standpoint to get the country moving into this now nationally 32% range of renewables generation. In some parts of the country, 40% generation. How was that feasible, especially when just 5 years ago they were saying, it wasn't going to be technically feasible to load 10% renewables into the grid because of the intermittency. So the way that they've been doing this, to date at least, has largely been done by virtual power plants. So new entrepreneurial tech companies censoring up these individual arrays on farmers' plots, and censoring up wind turbines and bringing them under a centralized control mechanism. So the TSO in their case can basically say, we need the energy curtailed or we need it ramped up. And demand, at one point it was 5 minutes, now can be done in a matter of seconds across the nation, is causing them to believe, and we spoke at length with engineers across the ecosystem, that it's 100% technically feasible to get to 100% renewable. So technical feasibility now seems to be off the table. And to me, for the United States, with companies like IBM that could power and do that virtual power plant activity at scale in the United States, it's a huge commercial opportunity, in the marketplace. So those were mainly my thoughts. I think, just ending on it, the way that we sort of ran our calculus and basically said we do see that distributed power will make inroads. We hope the utilities will actually be the ones orchestrating that distributed future because it makes the most sense, I think, for the United States. But just the fact that you can combine that sort of engineering know-how around keeping the grid stable, is that increased renewables, plus that censoring technology, data control and analytics, plus battery storage, which again, the United States is leading in. You have the makings of new energy systems. One of the other reasons we know that that's a huge trend that can push forward is because we have developing countries like Singapore, countries in Africa that are coming to us and asking us as a company to help them with a roadmap towards a distributed energy future. So rather than them investing in a centralized system and building up all those wires and developing traditional systems, they'd rather just go to distributed immediately. And for those countries to make that type of investment and drive the commercialization of all the related products will also have an impact and a bearing, on our market. So,
what might our energy system in the United States look like 50 years from now? Really long term, and anybody else feel free to piggyback.
It's a great question. I mean, I think, the way I was actually just in the panel, maybe others were, watching, the utility companies talk about how they're feeling about opportunity in the market today and how they're innovating and changing. And I was really encouraged, as I was also, if people haven't seen Utility Dive's State of the Electrical Utility 2015 report, to note that the utilities are now seeing, actually about half of them now are seeing that distributed power is the #1 commercial opportunity they have. Was really exciting. I think that's a huge change from prior years, but they're all saying that over on the stage there. So what I see is whether or not they develop those technologies on their own, they're probably not better suited to doing that, but for them to monitor the market and to support, the outside companies that are going to innovate in this area and sort of work to control that system and provide the backbone of it, I think is a way of blending the current competence and the current investments that are in place and that are going to be in place, but adding new sort of products and innovations for customers.
Yes, Jose?
The one thing I can tell you, in 50 years, it's going to have to be looked at, not independently. I mean, the energy architecture is a global thing, right? So
absolutely.
The U.S. has been at the kind of the top of the architecture, if you want to call it like that, and Western Europe for a long time, but that is changing and has been changing for a while. So the effects of different events or technologies that would be applied elsewhere in the world are going to have an impact in the U.S. And the best example I can give you is not an energy example, but it's cell phone technology, right? Mm-hmm. Cell phone technology, which is the mother of all distributed systems,
yep.
Ended up bypassing much development in countries like India and so on, going from no phone to smartphone in just one jump. You know?
Right.
So, and that affects the American, in energy, technologies that can do things like that are going to affect the American economy very large. But for sure, the thing's going to look like it's going to be a lot more diverse. There's going to be a lot more. And let me just tell you, considerations. There's something I saw one time about what was the, instead of gas stations, think of the energy station of the future, right? Where you go buy your energy, and that would include definitely oil and gas products. Still, 50 years from now, but you could have the option of adding a rapid charge station in the same station.
Some cars. Yeah.
Just be sure you don't blow it up. But, and you could make a selection between a greener liquid fuel or a fossil liquid fuel, or you can even use hydrogen, which is one of the things that we see as a big growth opportunity. Hydrogen is just like electricity. It's not an energy source because it doesn't exist in nature very much on its own, but it's a very efficient energy carrier, and it's a good storage molecule for electricity. So it's something that we see as coming good. That's one of the things. Battery technology, that's something that you and I maybe could talk about. Battery technology is all fine and dandy, and it's been going, but there's another way to store energy, and that's in molecules, in chemicals, which is what oil and gas really are, right? So if you could store solar energy in molecules, you would have a very versatile system. Solar photovoltaic type things that are not affordable now, but could become in the future. So don't forget hydrogen as part of the system.
We're seeing that the conversation, at least amongst our corporate fellows that work on at a technical level on batteries, the conversation has shifted more towards which technology would actually be the best in terms of the safest, the most reliable, the most efficient in the marketplace. And so we are exploring our different types of thermal batteries rather than what seems to be the workhorse today is lithium ion for sure.
And in the transportation industry, I think you're going to see more of that categorization. Very many, in Texas particularly, large bus fleets in cities are starting to use natural gas, right? Compressed natural gas as the fuel. I think that, there's now somebody talking about electrifying all the cabs in Los Angeles, I think is the, so I think you're going to start to see this diversification by service as well, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to, make the energy landscape a lot more diverse. So utilities, just like all companies, need to be thinking about a diverse set of products, not only one.
Yeah, we'll open it up to questions for the audience in just a minute. I just have one last question, kind of more of a fun one. Every once in a while, something like this comes along that we don't expect coming, and it changes the world. Is there a chance, and I ask this because, here in Austin, we pride ourselves on being one of the innovation capitals of the world. We've got a lot of smart people working on some fantastic startups, things that I would never have thought of. We have somebody who is looking into harnessing the kinetic energy that cars generate on Interstate 35. We've got people looking at harnessing the tides of the ocean, and everything that comes along with that. Anybody have hope or expect that something's just going to come out of the blue and blow everything else away? Any hope for that?
In the energy sector?
In the energy sector, yeah.
I mean, who has an idea? Because if I had an idea, I wouldn't be here.
That's right. And I do know there are some people, but yeah. Is there anything that you've immersed? Because me as a layman, I look at harnessing the kinetic energy on Interstate 35. That's well above my head. Have no idea the feasibility of that or anything. But I was wondering if any of you all have seen anything that you say, oh, you know what, that might be something 20 years from now.
The thing is that the people that have the solution or seen the solution don't recognize it. I mean, that when it came out, it's a created need, but it wasn't recognized when it first started.
Nobody was crying for these. You're right.
So very difficult when asked the question, what's the magic bullet? I mean, or is there a magic bullet? Well, probably there is, but humans have a total inability to predict things like that. You know?
Very
Well,
true.
You know, it
Very
doesn't
true.
have to be a brand new technology either. And I'm just going to, because I'm an oil and gas person, I'll give an example.
Yeah.
The horizontal drilling, for example, that had been, around
Ex-
from the
yeah,
40s.
yeah, what an
Nobody
innovation.
thought about using it for
fracking.
For fracking. And then once
Which
that,
had also been around for,
right, for a long, long time. And
the
so it's just
combination.
it is sort of iterative, but that was a huge technological, it wasn't an innovation, it was just a way of using it
Using it,
differently.
right.
And off you were.
Good
You see,
point.
very, very important, there's a difference between invention and innovation.
Right.
Yes.
And innovation could include things that already exist, and that's where I think
Yeah.
you have something that could be there.
Very
And we've
good.
seen some
Inventions, I
game
don't think.
changers already. You know, I mean, I think personally the Tesla battery, I think, is a huge game changer for the market. I mean, especially at the utility scale, and I think that's why they were able to sell, $1 billion right away, 92% of those going to utilities, which, kind of shows you, the massive potential, overall for changing the system. So we're already seeing it.
I'll answer your question. So we do a lot of oil and gas properties, but also commercial properties like this building. So when I look at that, I see where our portfolio of buildings, where it gets refied in 7 years, all buildings have the debt service. And when it comes to refi, that's when you put the HVAC system, high efficiency glass, the new carpet, the new marble, what have you. The underwriters are looking at, you know what, I want more energy efficiency, like energy storage. Energy storage confuses underwriters. They're not scientists, they're not engineers. But they do understand energy efficiency, and energy efficiency is now considered acceptable means of parting under debt service, right? So that's going to be the accelerator. So so utilities perspective saying, I'm keeping the meter revenue versus something else, versus the building portfolio people saying, you know what, I'm looking at a fuel cell, because I can get a 12-year fuel contract, natural gas, for $1.50. That makes my cost of KWH 3.8 cents. That's very, very attractive. That cuts their energy in half. On my oil fields, most of the guys are doing on-site generation. Either getting a long-term gas contract from the pullers, which is the wholesalers, or they're using on-site generation. So it's a great experiment going on rather than microgrids. We hear about all the microgrid kind of stuff. What's happening? Well, guess what? The oil field guys are doing it. They need on-site generation. When I speak to my operators, they're looking at wind and solar. And they're hydrocarbon people. For they're the ones that are saying my property is a microgrid, and they're already connected to a substation. And ERCOT says, hey, you know what? These guys are shutting off here today. Why is that?
Most of Shell offshore platforms,
Say again?
most of Shell's offshore platforms, deep sea platforms, are powered by wind. Because burning oil and gas to do it is burning your product, You don't want to do that.
Your lifting costs, and that's what I've heard from family, I'm sure they know, is so our lifting costs $60 a barrel, right? $40 a barrel. Right? All my customers, it's $6 to $18 a barrel lifting cost. So Saudi Arabia can keep doing the price war all they want, go for it, right? But the very first time in Saudi Arabia's history, they now have to do debt. Welcome to the club, right? That kind of thing. So the race to the bottom. But the thing about it is, the industry is a great innovation center, or oil and gas industry, is saying, you know what, I do want the micro turbine, right? I do want the fuel cell, and they're looking at it. Doosan's looking at all oil field guys and then operate to be able to say, you know what, I want on-site power. And matter of fact, I want the heat too, as well.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
You talk about gas production, but what's interesting is the Ventec analysis shows that gas production is actually increasing, even though the rig count is going down. And I think that's because 80% of free cash flow is used to service debt in these independent companies. So they're having to produce more to generate revenue just to service their debt.
And that's true for the oil guys too. That's right. That's right. So we're seeing that now, but they can't do it forever. So we're probably going to see it shut down. But that's absolutely correct. That's what we were seeing.
I'll make a comment about the microgrid situation. We're definitely seeing an uptick in just different communities of interest in developing microgrids, which has been sort of astonishing for us. We're actually developing our first microgrid system standard, UL 3001. just started now in response to this, I guess, overwhelming demand for kind of a roadmap of how to put together a microgrid in a safe and effective and resilient way. Initially, we had only been seeing in the last decade that, mostly universities, were working on these microgrids and experimenting with them, and then certain healthcare facilities. But indeed, now we're seeing more just individual property owners coming and asking, for a roadmap on how to do this and wanting, because now they have all the pieces, parts to create their own microgrid. They're just wanting to go ahead and put it
Just
together.
to vote on that, because when you're a microgrid, and the presentation that we all see, multi-buildings and utilities being the middleman, versus saying the individual stakeholder of the building. And when the underwriter said, if you give me a microturbine and energy storage, I'm increasing your square foot value 10 to 15%. Right? What does that mean? The average commercial building in the US is $10 million. The day upon commissioning, right, the engineer turned it on. It's an instantaneous 1.5 million of equity. Right? That's going to be the driver. So it's not going to be less about how much energy you save me, maybe energy independence, maybe hedge against demand response, that's great. But you know what? The biggest bucket of money is real estate. Just commercial property in the US, if I wrote a check to buy all commercial properties in the US, is $6.8 trillion, right? Much, much bigger than oil and gas people, right? So you look at that, what is the big driver? How do you add value? How do you wealth creation? That's what I look at. I look at whatever I do, either from the oil fields or the commercial properties, how to create wealth creation. Right? And utilities are not very good at wealth creation. But at the same token, if I remove my meter, I can't sell my property.
Good time for one more, I think. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. Jose, you talked about evaluating sustainability. What's the role of the federal government when we think about the geopolitical mess of the oil prices that everyone's kind of talking about here? We talked about it from the Shell perspective of myself and my company struggling because of the shock. The volatility of the price is much worse in my opinion than a high price for oil. And also the green in me is a little disappointed in that as well. But to the role of the government, the simple concepts of price floors, evaluating sustainability, what do you guys feel is the role of the federal government if this kind of volatility continues with prices?
That can get a little political, so I need to tread carefully, and just for the record, I will be speaking as me and not as Shell, okay? Given my new situation. But this business, sustainability, first of all, is not environmentalism, okay? Sustainability is not making things clean. That's not sustainability. Sustainability is doing that in a business that makes profits, that provides employment, and can do it for a long time, okay? That's sustainability. So that's what companies like Shell would be interested in, okay, in the whole thing. Of course, all those elements that we talk about have a value, have a, if you invest something good or not bad would happen to you, right? I mean, it's like safety, right? Safety, we know, or Shell knew that we needed to make investments in safety because there would be a negative value for us not to do it, but there was a value. What's the worth of one accident in the Gulf of Mexico? We all know that. So you can value it. Government can help in putting that structure in place. The structure that helps you determine what that value is. We lack it in some areas, particularly in the CO2 area. But in the sustainability equation, we lack that big sector, that we don't understand what does it mean if we spend $100 million in a refinery to reduce CO2 emissions from the refinery. What does that mean? You see the question? We don't know what it means. We don't know if it means that we won't get fined or the Shell won't get fined. It doesn't know. I don't know if it means we're going to make more money and we can sell the CO2. I don't know.
But yeah, but there is no answer to that. I guess the question is, do we have a war on carbon from the federal government? I guess that's just how far is that? I guess culturally.
Yeah, but it's not a war. I mean, it doesn't have to be a war. The society has become carbon averse, and the government has not been able to translate that into a framework where it can be dealt with by business.
And it's politically fragmented to get it unified.
Yeah, but I think everybody in the business, in the energy business, would like the government to help create the framework for it to be an accountable thing that we can make decisions on. People can make decisions on.
Yeah. Can I ask something? So economists like free markets, right? And when regulation sort of changes prices generally, and so sort of changes the allocation of resources. But in the sense, like you were talking about, CO2, some of this, there are negative externalities, and CO2 is one of them. Yeah. So one of the roles of government could be that you internalize some of those costs, and that's what the regulation can do. So the price is actually accurately reflecting what that social cost is rather than just the market cost. So in that sense, you could have some regulation. Now, so that's where, as you say, that's the framework where you internalize the costs, and that actually still, I mean, that's one. Negative externalities, I think, are one area maybe where economists, well, except for maybe one. I'm not talking about you here. But that's where you think the government has a role there to sort of internalize those costs so that the market outcome is.
Let me get something in here.
Yeah,
Jose.
go ahead.
I mean, good example. I mentioned about the CAFE rules that are being put in place. You know, it's trying to accomplish, being more efficient and so forth, but it's going to have all kinds of negative externalities, and in fact, it is so much less efficient way of approaching the issues surrounding that. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office did a study back in the early 80s, which highlighted the fact that you'd be much better off coming out with a fuel tax, which then is very obvious to people, and we can talk about it more directly, what the cost of all this is. When you internalize it into a CAFE rule, which will then result in these hidden way of looking at the cost of that by building in this technology that's going to add to the price of vehicle, not transparent, and actually leads to negative externalities with making something more efficient, like your cost per mile of driving your vehicle, leads to urban sprawl, overutilization of a vehicle, lots of stuff that was probably never intended with those kinds of rules.
Companies put a CO2 value on projects, right? So when you're looking at a new investment and you want to do the economics of a new investment, you have to put a value, you have to put a money number on the molecules of CO2 that are going to be emitted because of that business. Okay, it can be zero, but many companies assign a value. But the problem is that the whole project's economics is completely tainted, or not tainted, but it's influenced by that value. And it changes the rules of the game. If you build a project and you had that value, and by the time you have it, there's no regulation, there's no way to value carbon, it's a free-for-all. I mean, you don't know, it's a big unknown. So to me, I would, and I know that oil companies as a whole beg the governments of the world to just tell them or help us determine what is the cost, value, penalty, tax, price, whatever you want to call it, of CO2.
Uncertainty hurts investment, and that's what that is. I mean, it's a lot of uncertainty, and so changing the regulation also gives rise to a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So that's right.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to thank you for joining us this morning, and then also Jose, Mene, Bill, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. I believe it's lunchtime. Thank you very much.
Good to meet you.